Again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. Please be informed that this session will be recorded. And to formally start our session, may I call on our moderator for this afternoon's webinar, Moon Shrestha, Program Management Officer from the UN Environment Program Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. Moon, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this fourth and final series of the pre-forum webinar on building resilient ecosystem, addressing climate change impact in Asia Pacific. So these webinars are the interactive online engagement leading to the 8th APAN Forum happening in 30th August to 1st September. So out of the four streams of the APAN Forum, ecosystem and ecosystem stream is led by UNEP and IUCN, and this webinar is part of the ecosystem stream. So before we go with the webinar, I would like to explain about the objective. So we all know that Asia and Asia Pacific region has one of the most diverse ecosystem in this whole world, ranging from high Himalayan mountain ecosystem to the low-lying coastal ecosystem. But these ecosystems are also very vulnerable to the climatic and non-climatic drivers. So in this webinar, we will look at what are the ecosystem and ecosystem services that we have, major ecosystem and services that we have in this region, and what are their vulnerabilities from the climatic and non-climatic drivers, and what are the challenges and as well as opportunities that we have to bring the transformational change in this sector based on what are the best practices that is happening in this region. And we will also focus on the, of course, as I said, opportunities also. So this is how we are going to, this is the main objective of this webinar. So next slide, please. Before I move on to the webinar, I'd like to go through the agenda. Today we have Dindo Campilan, Regional Director for Asia and Hub Director for Oceania IUCN, who will provide us the opening remark to set the scene for the further discussion in the webinar. And the opening remark will be followed by a presentation from Anna Kilponen, Regional Liaison Officer of GAN, Global Adaptation Network from UNEP. She will be presenting about the Resilient Outlook document. So this document is basically part of the ecosystem outlook document, and it is still in the draft phase, and we are refining it over the period. So we will really encourage your feedback and comment on this outlook document, which will really help us to refine the document. Anna also has a few questions prepared for you for the Mentimeter. And we really look forward to all the participants' input on these Mentimeter questions, which will really help us refining, as I said earlier, on this Outlook document. And after that, we will have a panel discussion. We have a very interesting panel today. We have Ambassador Adio Soros Barbosa from Timor-Leste. He's also the member of the Transitional Committee for Loss and Damage. And we have Deepsika Sharma from ICIMOD, Dr. Satrio Adi Wakasona from IUCN, and Margarita Victoria Kambala from COPSI UNEP. So we will have, they are coming from expertise, they have expertise from loss and damage to the working in ecosystem in different regions, from mountain to land, forest to coastal area. And we'll have a very interesting panel discussion lined up for you. And that will be followed by a question and answer session. And then we will have a closing remark from Mire Atala, Director Nature for Climate Branch UNEP. So before we go on to the agenda of the webinar, a little bit of housekeeping information for our participants. All the mics are muted except for of course, for the speakers and the panelists. But then I'd really like to encourage our participant to use the chat box so to post the questions for the panelists, as well as any suggestions and feedback on the Outlook document and anything that you'd like us to discuss. We would really encourage you all to put it in the chat box. And of course, we really look forward to your active participation in the Mentimeter also. So with this, I'll hand over to Dindo Kampilan for his opening remark. Dindo is the Regional Director for Asia and Hub Director for Oceania of IUCN. He has more than 20 years of leadership and program management experience in agriculture, food, environment, research and development with CGIAR and UN. He has also served as a commissioned expert for FAO, IFAD, and UNDP as a value chain development, agriculture, agrobiodiversity conservation, and climate change adaptation. So Dr. Kampilan is from Philippines and holds PhD degree in agriculture and environment science. So over to you, Dr. Dindo.
Thank you, Mon. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are connecting from. There's a lot of excitement building up for this year's edition of the APAN Forum. And this afternoon, we are focusing on one of the 4 streams, as explained by Mon, which is around resilience of ecosystems and ecosystem services. While the overall forum looks at climate adaptation, here we are as a group talking and discussing and trying to outline what are some of the key issues on climate action and climate adaptation in relation to ecosystem resilience, how the synergy builds up, how climate adaptation contributes to better ecosystem resilience, and vice versa, how ecosystem resilience also contributes to the broader role of climate adaptation. If you look at the agenda for Songdo, you will see that we have a very interesting set of sessions lined up, framed by the enablers for the overall forum, looking at policies, looking at programming, science and technology, as well as finance and investment. Now, this webinar today is sort of a prequel. I'm going to introduce us to what's going to happen, the discussion that's going to take place in about 3 or 4 weeks from now. Most important for us as participants of today's webinar is to make sure that the stream that's going to happen in Songdo is going to build on what we already knew and agreed from previous editions of the APAN Forum and similar other events. For example, we're not looking here anymore to agree on a definition of EBA or NBS or why they're important. That's already been established. Today, we take the discussion further. What are the continuing challenges? What are the remaining issues that need to be addressed? But more importantly, what have been the evolving and emerging new ideas and innovations? We have an important role, not only to help define the scope and the focus of the stream on-site at the event, but also the discussion today is going to feed into the other streams of the whole forum. Yesterday, I was, for example, sitting in the other webinar with ADB for cities and infrastructures. And indeed, you cannot separate the 4 streams. They're all interconnected. So we think not only about how we frame the discussion for this particular stream, but how it would contribute to the other streams of the forum. Similarly, there are also many important side events is going to happen during that particular week. So let's think about the broader value of the ideas that we share today, but most importantly, to help the organizers, UNEP, of course, IUCN, and all our partners in being able to prioritize what are the key messages we'd like to bring to Songdo. Finally, it's also important that we'll speak about the road to Songdo just happening. So this is not the only road talking about climate adaptation or ecosystem services. Let's think back. Just days ago, we had a G20 ministerial meeting on climate and environment. I had the opportunity to be with many of you, including the executive director and the regional director of UNEP, for example. Again, there was a reaffirmation of G20 countries and the importance of EBAs, including NBSs. Yeah, last week we had a stock-taking exercise on the Food System Summit in Rome, where climate and climate adaptation again featured as a key ingredient for sustainable food systems. And days earlier than that, in New York, was a high-level political forum, again to stock take on where we are in terms of the SDGs. So let's look at these other roads. Let's look at how those discussions from previous days build on today, but also most importantly, not only to feed into the discussion in Songdo, but also beyond. I mean, all of us are looking forward to the main highway, which is COP28 happening in November in UAE. So my suggestion is that we make sure that we are providing ideas today that feed into the stream that we are responsible for, to the broader agenda of the forum itself, but also to the many other events and discussions happening before and also after Songdo. So as a challenge, and I think for everybody today, let's focus on framing the agenda and shaping the discussion of how this particular stream on ecosystem resilience and ecosystem services could prioritize and tease out the key decisions and actions coming out of the event from today. Looking forward to hearing the great discussion today. And again, thank you to all of you, Babu, and the rest of the team, but also to the panelists that we have lined up for today. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dindo, for the inspiring opening remark. As you said, this ecosystem and ecosystem stream, and all four streams, in fact, is very much linked with each other. And also, especially for ecosystem and ecosystem stream, where we have 4 billion people living in this region, and any impact in the ecosystem will have direct impact on those communities and who are directly or indirectly dependent on this ecosystem. So it's very important for us to have work very intensely in this stream, and as you said, have a very key message that come out from this webinar, which can take to Songdo and also maybe beyond. So with this, can I please request Anna to take the floor for the present the Outlook document. Anna Kilponian works as a regional liaison office for UNEP, Global Adaptation Network in Asia Pacific. In this role, she supports GAN and APAN with communication, knowledge management, and coordination of initiatives, such as APAN Forum like this, and then UNEP UNFCCC's Lima Adaptation Knowledge Initiatives. Before joining UNEP, Anna had worked with UNDP and other international organizations such as IUCN, Conservation International, WWF, where she focused on regional partnership, biodiversity conservation, ocean ecosystem, and marine habitat. Monitoring and research work. She holds a master's degree in marine science from Stockholm University. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Moon, and great to be here with everybody. Thanks also for our participants for joining. So yeah, as Moon mentioned, I'll be briefly presenting the resilience outlook that is currently being developed ahead of the 8th APAN Forum under the ecosystems and ecosystem services stream that UNEP and IUCN are co-leading. And the intention really with the resilience outlook is to capture some of the key elements under the stream, and also to provide kind of like the backdrop for the forum discussions, focusing on those five key enablers. And in this presentation, I will go through the overview of the outlook, a draft, and looking at some of the key limitations, and also where the strengths and opportunities are in the context of ecosystems and ecosystem services resilience in this region. As was mentioned by Moon, we also want to take this opportunity to hear from you, from our participants, and we really invite you to get also your perspectives on the outlook in the Mentimeter that will follow my presentation, yeah, so that we can ensure that we integrate all the diverse perspectives into the final, and that those will be reflected in the final outlook, which will be published later this month. The stream and the outlook intends to spotlight a couple of key ecosystems that are threatened by climate change. This is not to say that there aren't other key ecosystems that are at risk, but just for the purpose and the scope of this outlook, we wanted to highlight these three broad ecosystem types, in particular in relation to their characteristics and vulnerabilities. In terms of marine and coastal and island ecosystems and the climate impacts, we're seeing rising temperatures, ocean acidification and deoxygenation, which then lead and induce changes in the marine life and marine environment, including coral bleaching and changes in species habitats and migration patterns as well. Rising sea levels and intensified storms, saline intrusion and erosion also pose significant risks to coastal environments and coastal and island communities. In regards to the forest ecosystems, increasing temperatures have shown to stress tree species, impacting their health. Wildfires have also been documented to intensify due to climate change, and those are driven by drought and hotter conditions, which pose severe threats to forest ecosystems and the communities that depend on those ecosystems. And the climate conditions also force species to migrate, affecting the overall ecosystem dynamics. On mountain ecosystems, they are also highly vulnerable to climate change impacts, with increasing temperatures leading to glacial melting, which can trigger glacial lake outburst floods, and increase the likelihood of landslides, and also impact water availability downstream, which affects millions of people who rely on these glacier fed rivers for their livelihoods and daily needs. And of course, in addition to these climate change related changes, there are also other human induced stressors such as pollution and habitat destruction that are affecting the resilience of these ecosystems and their ability to cope and continue to provide the crucial ecosystem services to people. So in this context of the stream, I just wanted to really briefly mention this term nature-based solution, which Dindo already referred to. It's probably a very familiar term for our audience, but just to mention that this is an umbrella term or framework that is being used, and it really underpins, highlights the role of ecosystems in addressing a range of challenges, from socioeconomic challenges to environmental and climate change, while at the same time providing human well-being benefits and contributing to ecosystem and biodiversity benefits. And this is a term that was adopted first by IUCN, and it was followed by the adoption of the NBS resolution as a multilaterally agreed definition by the UN Environment Assembly in 2022. Also in the context of this session, under this NBS umbrella term, there are also other concepts that are being used, referring to different types of NBS, such as ecosystem-based adaptation, which refers to an approach that uses nature and ecosystem services for adaptation and resilience building. So as a part of the outlook and diving into these enablers, The first one that we looked at was governance and policy, and some of the limitations that were identified include limited participation of women and indigenous and local communities in environmental decision making, and also limited coordination between ministries and agencies, and also different levels of government was identified as a limitation, which is this challenge in particularly in the context of cross-cutting challenges like climate change adaptation. In terms of nature-based solutions in policies and governance frameworks, it was noted that the cross-cutting nature of NBS is not adequately reflected. And while some policies have integrated NBS to a degree, the overall approach is often fragmented. Looking at the strengths and the opportunities, there are key regional avenues that are being used for governance and policy, that support governance and policy for ecosystem resilience, such as the Forum of Ministers and Environmental Authorities in Asia Pacific, which identifies priorities and emerging issues from the region, which are then reflected in the preparations for the UN Environment Assembly. There are also strong international governance architecture in place, including agreements that we're all very familiar with, Paris Agreement, also the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, among others. Then looking at the planning and programming enabler and the limitations, and here we looked at the limitations that we looked at were in relation to the challenges that many projects and programs have in regards to their requirements that are often being very strongly donor driven. And there's also a need to focus on long-term resilience building instead of focusing on short-term development efforts. There's also a need to strengthen inclusive planning and programming on ecosystem resilience, and particularly at the local level. On strengths and opportunities, we do see that there are many national level policies that integrate some aspects of NBS and ABA. For example, Nepal's National Adaptation Plan process is specifically looking to integrate EBA, and Bangladesh's NAP promotes nature-based solutions for conservation of biodiversity. Here also making the link kind of on the more global processes. There's an increasing international momentum. Just to highlight a few in the past year, we've seen the adoption of the agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, or the High Seas Treaty for short, and also the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that aims to protect 30% of land and sea by 2030. Let's go back to, there's also, just to mention the global golden adaptation, which aims to build adaptive capacity and strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability to climate change. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, co-led by UNEP and FAO, which is really aiming to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems. And linking to the limitations in relation to locally led planning, there is the locally led adaptation, and the principles are gaining momentum to help place communities in the center of adaptation efforts. Moving ahead to the science and assessments. Some of the limitations identified here were in relation to limited data and lack of early warning coverage. It was noted that even though there are a number of countries with multi-hazard early warning systems in place in Asia Pacific, still many are lacking adequate early warning coverage. There's also a slow uptake and scale up of NBS approaches, and this is also linked to the limited awareness and knowledge of the benefits that ecosystems and NBS can deliver for climate resilience, for example, by reducing climate risks. On the strengths and opportunities, it was noted that there are a range of tools and resources developed to support NBS and EBA implementation. For example, the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions and UNEP's briefing note series on that focuses on specific ecosystems and EBA. There are also emerging regional and transboundary collaboration and global initiatives that aim to bridge some of these gaps identified under this enabler, such as the early warnings for all, that aims to ensure that everybody in the planet will be protected by early warning systems by 2027. In the region, there are also several regional and sub-regional centers that support, provide information and support research and knowledge exchange. Some of which are very familiar, I'm sure, such as APAN, APPLAT, ICIMOD, and SPREP. On technologies and practices, it was identified there's limited availability of technologies and practices in local level, and this really highlights the need to ensure an equitable access for local communities and other local actors to resources. NBS approaches are often still implemented in quite a small or medium scale. So it was identified there's a need for scalable approaches that can then trigger transformational change. On strengths and opportunities, there are programs and projects implemented in the region that do demonstrate the role of NBS and generate the knowledge of the impacts of NBS. In addition, Asia and the Pacific region overall is quite well connected digitally. That different technologies and practices can leverage on and build upon. In addition to technologies like GIS and remote sensing, there are also other emerging technologies such as big data and artificial intelligence that are predicted to play a major role in building climate resilience. For example, machine learning has been piloted in India to forecast flooding. And then moving on to the fifth and final enabler on finance and investments. And the major limitation here that was identified is that funding for adaptation is falling woefully short on what is needed. According to the UNEP Adaptation Gap Report, the adaptation funding needs in the region for the 2021-2030 period were estimated to be up to 200 billion per year. Also, funding for nature-based solution implementation is lacking, and the situation is unfortunately quite similar if we look at funding for early warning systems and baseline climate data. Finally, it was identified there's limited engagement and financing from private sector on NBS, which is a big opportunity if that can be unlocked. On strengths, there are investments coming to the region from key funds such as GTF, Adaptation Fund, and JEF. It is emerging, the language on nature-based solutions and EBA it is emerging with some of the funding calls with donors. And some funds such as the Global EBA Fund, which is co-implemented by IUCN and UNEP, is actually specifically targeting to scale up catalytic EBA approaches. There are also other ecosystem-based financing models and instruments, such as the payments for ecosystem services, and blue and green bonds, and then the recently approved plan to establish the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund to finance the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework is expected to help boost countries' ability to protect and restore and ensure the sustainable use of ecosystems. I think with that, I will hand it over to Moon to take us through the Mentimeter, in which Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. Before we go to the Mentimeter, there is a question from Sachitra. Actually, basically, I think it's a comment. It's like freshwater ecosystem service needs more focus in the adaptation program, which I feel is very genuine. So maybe you want to address to this comment from Sucharit?
Sorry, Mun, can you repeat the question, please?
I think it's basically more than a question. It's a comment. Is that Sucharit says that its freshwater ecosystem service need more focus in adaptation program, right? So I know this project, this Outlook document is still in the revision phase. So you want to address this?
Yeah, thanks, Moon, and thank you for that comment. Yeah, we definitely by focusing on those 3 ecosystems that I've mentioned, we by no means don't want to say that there aren't other ecosystems that aren't crucial. It was just for the scope of the outlook that we had decided to frame it that way. But well noted on this, and definitely freshwater ecosystems are crucial. Maybe we can also make sure to add that in the outlook document as a key ecosystem as well. Any other feedback you have, we would also very much welcome through the Menti and also in the Q&A. Thanks.
Yes, and I think Khalid also has the similar question. So you have already responded to that. And also, colleague, as I said, Anna, and what we've been saying, that this project document, this Outlook document is still in the revision phase. So your comments and suggestions are very much welcome. So we'll go to the Mentimeter. For the Mentimeter also is designed so that we want to get your input and feedback on how we can, what are the things that needs to be incorporated in the Outlook document, and refine it to revise it over the coming days. So we are going to the Mentimeter. You can see the scanner code in this screen. You can either scan it or go to mentimeter.com and insert this number. Yeah, and also I think Vanessa has shared the link of Mentimeter in the chat box. You can go to the link directly and you can see the question. So we have a couple of questions. I think we are already starting to get answer to the first question. The first question is, what are the key challenges in implementation to enhance ecosystem and ecosystem services resilience? So, as I said, colleague, please participate in this Mentimeter. Please provide your feedback to us so that can be incorporated in the Outlook document. So we have, got financing, limited financing, policy and sustainability, yes, large area and timeline. So limited financing, I think financing is coming up, yeah. And of course, technology and human capacity. Okay. Equity and benefit sharing, of course, right? And awareness, raising awareness is also a power of nature, right? Yeah. Thank you so much. We already have 19 response, 20. And also, colleagues, this Mentimeter will be open throughout the session. So if over the period of the webinar, if you're during the panel discussion also, if you want to go back to these questions and provide your input, it will be open throughout the webinar. I think we already have 23 questions. So do you want to go to the second one, Anna?
Yes, yeah, let's move to the second one.
Okay, so as Anna has presented, there are 5 enablers based on which Outlook document has been prepared. So it would be good to know, like, according to what are the priority to strengthen the resilience of ecosystem based on these enablers. So we have already getting response to that. It seems like policy and governance is the priority 1 enabler, followed by finance and investment. And technology and practice is the 3rd, and it seems like okay. So yeah, science and assessment is It looks like yes. In the previous question also, the participant also responded about the finance and investment enabler is one of the major priority area. It seems like all of us think that this should be the priority. Followed by policy and governance, science and assessment, and then technology and practice. And the fifth one is planning and programming. Okay, on the third one, the third question is looking ahead, what are the opportunities to bring about this transformation change? So we already have two responses in this one. So we'd like to hear more from the participant. Behavioral change and scaling NBS as adaptation options, yes, transform the collaboration among adjacent states in large ecosystem, very true for ecosystem. So yeah, stream. So shall we give some more time for more response on this one? Maybe 1 more minute. Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much for all your input. And as I mentioned earlier, this Mentimeter will be open throughout the webinar, so you can always come back and respond to any of the 3 questions. And also, like if you have any comment and feedback on the Outlook document, you can also reach out. You can also provide your feedback comments on the chat box, and also you can reach out to Anna directly. So with this, thank you so much, Anna. So we can move to our third agenda, that is the panel discussion. Okay, let me take a few minutes to introduce our panel members today. We have 4 panel members for today's panel discussion. We have Ambassador Mr. Adio Saros Barbosa. Ambassador Adio is a special envoy with the category of Ambassador at Large from Climate Affairs for the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. He is also the national focal point for IPCC from Timor-Leste. Mr. Adio is also a member of the LDC expert group under the UNFCCC and also nominated as vice chair for the LDC. He also serves as the LDC coordinator and spokesperson for loss and damage on the behalf of LDC member states. Mr. Adio is also a member of Transitional Committee for Loss and Damage funding arrangement. He also served as a member of the Executive Committee for Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage under the UNFCCC as a representative of LDC. Welcome, Ambassador Adio. The second panelist is Dr. Deepsika Sharma. Deepsika is a climate and environmental specialist at ICIMOD with expertise in water and environment and climate change and renewable energy. She leads the climate portfolio at ICIMOD and coordinates the action area on strengthening global leadership in sustainable mountain development. Deepsika has a PhD in natural resource management and has experience working in national and international organizations in South Asia. Our third panelist is Margarita Victoria Cabela. Margarita leads the Marine and Coastal Ecosystem Program of the Secretariat of COPSI, the coordinating body of the Seas of East Asia. COPSI aims to support countries in addressing marine biodiversity challenges. Prior to this, Margarita worked as a project focused on strengthening marine protected areas at Conservation International. She advocates for the human and nature harmony in conservation of the ocean. Welcome, Margarita. And our fourth panelist is Dr. Satrio Adi Vikaksono. Dr. Satrio has PhD in tropical climate science and is currently with IUCN Asia Regional Office, working at the intersection of actionable environment research policy process in Southeast Asia. Satrio has also worked with European Forest Institute EU RED facility, where he served as a forest and land use governance expert based in Kuala Lumpur. So welcome to all our panelists. Yes, so I'd like to start our panel discussion now. Like my first question is to Deepsika, Margarita, and Satrio. So we all know that we've been hearing that from Anna's presentation on the Outlook, and also from Dindo. He emphasized that though we have a very crucial ecosystem and ecosystem services in this region, they are also very vulnerable from the three planetary crises: the climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. In this context, this whole ecosystems become very vulnerable, and once they become vulnerable, it compromises on the services that provide. And as I said, there are like more than over 4 billion people directly, indirectly relevant on these ecosystem and ecosystem services. In this context, I would like to hear from the different, and we are very glad to have an expert working in different ecosystem today as a panelist, and we would like to hear what are the main challenges of planning and implementing adaptation options or interventions that helps bring the transformational change in this region, right? And then also, like, there are many things that's happening in this sector, in this region, and some of the very good practices that is there. So based on the best practices, or based on the things that have worked in the region, what are the challenges? How can these challenges be overcome to bring the transformational change as we are talking about, right? So maybe can I hand it over to panelists? Do you want to go from the mountain forest to the coastal region, or the other way around? I leave it to you. So Margarita, you want to go?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
From the bottom up.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So thank you so much for inviting Comsi in this important webinar. So as Anna mentioned earlier, the marine and coastal ecosystems experience some of the harshest effects of climate change, like coral bleaching, ocean acidification. These are just some of the climate-related issues that are damaging our oceans, harming marine life, and increasing our vulnerability. So I feel that a main challenge that affects resilience is finding the balance between economic growth, human well-being, and conservation, especially considering different priorities and needs among the stakeholders and users of the space. So the lack of harmony is actually what led us to the triple planetary crisis in the first place. In the marine and coastal space, land use change or change in coastal areas towards economic and social use is sometimes necessary, but also contribute to vulnerability. For instance, transforming mangroves into fish ponds was prevalent some decades ago in this region. These fish ponds not only provide food for us, but it's also a source of livelihood for many coastal and fishing communities, as well as an economic opportunity. Aquaculture is seen as an alternative to fishing, allowing fish stocks in the open sea to recuperate. However, some of these were established at the detriment of mangroves. And we know that mangroves are crucial in storing carbon, up to 5 times more than forests as part of blue carbon. They need to be protected and restored to provide nature-based solution to address climate change. Luckily, we now have the new global biodiversity targets, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which have set ambitious targets to protect nature while ensuring active participation of indigenous people, local communities, women, and the vulnerable. Apart from the 30 by 30 target that is most highlighted in this GBF, Target 1 focuses on having all land and sea areas under spatial plan. And I see that developing a comprehensive spatial plan or a marine and coastal spatial plan in my line of work requires negotiation and active collaboration among all levels of community and sectors. So in this way, you'll be able to map out the use of the ocean space, which spaces needs to be conserved, which are for tourism, livelihood, energy, transport, etc., etc. So in this design, you can create an adaptive space that protects the vulnerable communities and utilizes the ecosystems as part of nature-based solution and the wider topic on sustainable blue economy. It provides an opportunity to harmonize socioeconomic needs with environmental conservation. So I feel that this cannot be done in a mere geographic boundaries or political approach in their own countries. It requires integrated approach across large spaces, even through regional collaboration. So I'm happy to share that in our work with the coordinating body on the seas of East Asia, we are striving to support the implementation of this GBF with our newly adopted Marine and Coastal Ecosystems Framework, which has been agreed upon by our 9 participating countries to increase our efforts and the improvement of the ecosystems in the East Asian seas. So basically, what I see is the proper planning of the space and working at the regional and transboundary level. That's it for the marine and coastal space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margarita. And you have raised a very good question. Like, it's always a challenge for all ecosystem and more for the marine ecosystem to find a balance between economic growth, human needs, and the conservation needs. Right. So, and also you have raised a very good question about the projects or the programs or any initiatives to go beyond the political boundary or beyond the project boundary and think of it from the regional level or maybe at the global level, right? When we are talking about climate change. So thank you, Margarita. So I'll go to Dr. Satrio now to based on what Margarita said. Maybe you'd like to elaborate further on the issues that Margarita has raised. Over to you, Satrio.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Moon. So I'll be bringing the perspective of forests. So on forests, one thing that I would like to remind everyone, we know that recent studies show that many forest ecosystems, including in Asia Pacific, might be nearing their tipping point. So forests might permanently turn into savannas, become a net emitter of greenhouse gases, and lose their ability to bounce back. And this happens if they are continuously degraded, fragmented, or exposed to prolonged droughts because of El Nino, for example. So given such context, I would argue that conserving and safeguarding primary forests from deforestation and fragmentation are already a key adaptation measure. In this regard, we've seen progress from many countries in our region, from Asia Pacific, to slow deforestation, but we need to do it faster and more effectively. Another key adaptation measure is, of course, to reverse the trend of deforestation by conducting wide-scale forest and landscape restoration, or FLR, which was also mentioned by Anna in her presentation on resilience outlook. And this is a topic I'd like to spend more time on. So FLR is, of course, a perfect example of ecosystem-based adaptation because it aims to improve ecological functions while also enhancing human well-being across deforested and degraded forest landscapes. And one example of a common FLR approach in our region is agroforestry. And with agroforestry, especially if we are talking about climate-smart agroforestry, we can also clearly see potential economic benefits for local people despite the changing climate. So this is sort of like linking sort of like all those seemingly opposing aspects that Margarita mentioned earlier, at least in the context of forest ecosystems. But despite the benefits, FLR is of course not without challenges. I'll just mention three that I think are the most important challenges. So first, in the context of FLR, unclear land tenure and land rights. And secondly, inadequate funding or financing that can bring long-term investments for FLR projects. And as I'm glad to see that many of the participants here also think that this is a key issue, a key challenge. And third, the silos and lack of coordination among relevant actors. So to overcome such challenges, first we need to elevate FLR, forest and landscape restoration, to become national priorities. And I think we've seen many encouraging moves and examples from countries in our region. So some countries, for example, have made pledges toward the bond challenge, which IUCN initiated, and some have also clearly shown significant increase in their forest cover. And I think the momentum is there. It will keep going because we are now in the middle of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Perhaps, and I think also I agree with Margarita, what we can do as a region is to synergize better, to share with each other how the three key challenges I mentioned before can be overcome, and really work together to ensure shared benefits. And I think we need to remember that ecosystem services, including those provided by forests, do not stop at national borders. So we can create a regional movement, a regional partnership around FLR with countries in the driving seat. And this has been done in other regions. So in Latin America, for example, with Initiative 20 by 20, and in Africa with AFR 100. And perhaps it is now our turn in Asia Pacific to work collaboratively toward such bold FLR partnerships. And I know the seeds for this have been sown by many partners, and IUCN is also involved in that. And so, yeah, let's continue the conversation, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Satya. Yeah, I think when you're talking about the tipping point, I hope this also reinforces our need to come together as a region, as you and Margarita has been saying, that we don't. It's not only about coming together as a national, but also as a regional collaboration to make sure that, like, when you're talking about this tipping point, we take very urgent action to make sure that reverse the damage. And also when you're talking about this fragmentation of the forest, right? So for this, it's very important that we talk about the landscape level conservation. And for that, we need to have a kind of a regional collaboration. That's where I think the forum like this, APAN and other regional forum comes into play and is very useful for this. Thank you so much, Satya and colleagues. If you have comments for our panelists, you can already start writing your questions to them. Before I hand over to Deepsika, maybe you can run us over the vulnerability. Like mountain ecosystem is even more vulnerable, and the areas that you are working on, the Hindu Kush, the experience that you bring in is very crucial from when you are talking about this, like whatever happens in the mountain will have direct impact to the lower downstream region. So I'd like to hear from you, what are the challenges and what are the best practices that can be replicated to address those challenges? Over to you, Deepsika.
Thanks, Moon, and thanks for inviting us and and organizing this very important session by UNEP and IUCN in collaboration. I echo what other panelists were saying, especially in terms of collaboration and cooperation. I think this is the high time we need to start taking actions on it. Now, just to give a context, and thanks very much for bringing a mountain ecosystem perspective, at least in initiating the talks around it. I don't know if you follow the UNFCCC's negotiations this year. Mountains has been mentioned over 100-page document only twice, which is really not a healthy situation to be in. I think in this region, when you have been talking about 4 billion population, the 1.9 billion population in itself is directly and indirectly impacted by the mountains and the various adversaries due to the climate change. If you see the whole South Asia and Asia, there are also not only HKH, but other Central Asia mountains as well. At EC Mode, we are working with 8 member countries, starting from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan. These are our member countries which we are working with, and especially for the mountain ecosystems. Mountain ecosystem is not only about permafrost or cryosphere or glacier melting, but also about transboundary disasters, floodings, also about forest fires. It is also about biodiversity. We have been restricting ourselves so much into, specifically talking about glaciers melting. Yes, it is the most important factor because it will impact the freshwater flow downstream as well. But there are many ecosystems within the mountains. So like I touched upon, we have not only, alpine as the main ecosystem, we also have rangelands, wetlands, peatlands. So these are some of the interfaces where, it's important to work on. And when Margarita was focusing about GBF, so at ECMOD also we are working very closely on developing the indicators and the targets around GBF, global biodiversity framework, and how we can link it with the mountain ecosystem. We are also, some of the approaches which ECMOD is taking is working very closely with the national governments in implementing those action plans related to the biodiversity or climate change. What I would like to touch upon is that some of the triggers point, like recently if you have followed, so, in July itself, there was a big flash flood which was triggered in Bhutan. And it's again the series, the frequency with which the occurrences have been happening. It's really a kind of, we need to act now. So some of the challenges, I think Anna has already picked some of the points there, that data. So, the data in itself, is a challenge, especially for the mountains, collecting the data and, analyzing it. It's even a bigger challenge. ECMOD has been working on it for past 40 years. We have been looking into not only into the cries for the physical sciences, but also on the other aspects, which are highly interconnected at the species, genetic, ecosystem levels, understanding the impacts of climate change, understanding the impacts of the developments, unsustainable developments happening in the mountains. And these are the ones which are inducing the climate change. So another aspect which I feel needs to be understood very, maybe quickly, is that how we can develop a robust forecasting systems and, effective communication, especially when it is a disaster. We are talking about transboundary disasters related to all these impacts. So while developing our plans, it is important to focus on the risks associated with the transboundary disasters. It has been, the research is limited, so we have to invest in research. We have to invest in not only the primary, but also the action research, and also working very closely with the, the government focal points, the national governments, the state governments, and also the implementing bodies. And also what I would like to, touch upon is the resources. There is a lack of, investments which is directed towards achieving, or making more sustainable mountains. There are investments, but then the focused investment to combat climate change, that is not directed. So what we are trying to do is we are also trying to develop an investment framework, for the mountains, where we are looking at various different, areas. So one of the key areas which we are looking at is the nature-based solutions. Of course, also looking at a broader picture of ecosystem-based adaptation services. We are also looking at how we can have inclusive and climate-responsive financial landscape, how we can robust, shock-responsive social protection systems, how we can have resilient mountain entrepreneurial ecosystems, and so on and so forth. So ECMOD is investing in enabling practical, scalable responses to the issues, identifying the solutions, doing the pilots at the ground, and then implementing it. We are not only looking at, in terms of policy perspective, but also how we can have policy enablers and how we can strengthen or develop the green, resilient, inclusive, circular mountain economies and for sustainable mountain settlements. We are in the process of looking into the, these mountain economies and enterprises, how we can, help them adaptation to climate-induced financial vulnerabilities, but are also, in a way, also reducing the emissions. So if you see from the mountain perspective, there are two lenses. One is upstream to downstream, where we talk a lot about the transboundary, risks and disasters. A lot is related to waters, but also there is a direct impact of the downstream to upstream, which is related to the air pollution. So black carbon is one of the main things. So I think these are some of the points which I would like to highlight here. And one of the last example which I would like to give here is on the ecosystem-based adaptation, which we are focusing on in HKH. It has been reported to be quite effective for the region and for the mountain ecosystem. For example, we are working very closely with China in focusing on restoration of degraded lands, urban forestries, agrobiodiversities, then also with India and Nepal on the similar approaches, especially related to the disaster risk reductions. So that's I would like to touch upon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepshika. Yes, and you touch on very important issues, especially on the importance of mountain ecosystem and how upstream and downstream linkage is there, and how transboundary collaboration is important to make sure that we have a very robust early warning system, or the very good forecasting system, which helps to make sure that anything happening in the upstream can reach to downstream communities on the timely basis, so that they can address the disaster related issues. And also you have raised a very good issue about flash floods. The Himalayan region is very vulnerable for flash flood, glacier lake outburst flood, from the disaster perspective and also from the livelihood perspective. And it's so sad to hear that at the global level, it's not getting as much importance as it should be. And maybe this is where, like, forum like us, we can talk about more, like, where are the data gaps, what can we do? Maybe this is something that we can discuss it in the way forward also. So thank you so much to our three panelists. So we have a question here from Peter King. So are there any examples in this region for transboundary landscape generation? And so what are the key, if so, what are the key success factors? I think we did talk about, all three of you talk about the need for us to move beyond the political boundary, beyond the project boundary, and talk about it more from the transboundary perspective, right? So are there any success stories that, or success or best practices that can be shared? So would you like to go? Maybe.
Sure, maybe
Satya?
I can try answering. At least there are two examples of transboundary landscape regeneration, landscape approach, I would say, that I can think of. One would be sort of like international, because it involves Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. So this is the Heart of Borneo initiative. And then the other one that I can think of is one in Malaysia also, but in peninsular Malaysia. So that's the Central Forest Spine initiative. So trying to connect degraded forested landscapes within different Malaysian states. And so maybe to give you a bit of background, in Malaysia, for example, there are like different states with their own governance structure. So it's not always easy actually to get everyone to the same table, but at least I think the key success factors of these two initiatives, both one at the national level and then the other one at the international level, is to really get all the right persons on the table. So for them to be able to commit, to know that they have like a demand-driven partnerships, and then built on trust. So I think that's sort of like a key in the development of such initiatives, both Central Forest Spine and Heart of Borneo, that they agree it's an important initiative, and then they develop collaborative work plan. So I'll stop there first. Maybe we can continue into that later on. But just to say that to bring everyone on the right table, building on trust, and to bring collaborative partnership is a key factor. And I think it has been quite successful in both initiatives.
Yes, thank you, Satya. And I'm
So
sure I'll come to
Yeah.
I'll come to Deepshika also, because you did mention about ecosystem-based adaptation and the scalability at the Hindu Kush region. So as Isim I'm sure Isim experience would be very helpful. So maybe over to you, Deepshika.
Yeah, just I'll also give one example. Of course, EC Mode had this big program on the landscape. So we had like on Kailash landscape, Kanchenjunga, and others. So what we are looking at is, first of all, we need to identify the shared resources and the values. So for example, what are the shared resources in that particular landscape? It needs to be identified. Then accordingly, we are coming up with the different programs, and of course also for the projects, how we can strengthen the transboundary cooperation by either by institutionalizing these elements of the regional cooperation framework, or ensuring a wide-scale adoption of sustainable environmental conservation practices. So different platforms have been developed, not only working only with the government officials, but also with the the local communities, and also with the local authorities, and also with the global partners as well, to strengthen it. So it is a kind of a program where, for example, I would say we are also looking at the JC lens across or in those programs. Again, it is very important to see what exact, for example, I can also mention here that EC Mode has been working in the human-wildlife conflicts And especially with the Ramsar Convention, we are started looking into wetlands. And recently, we just had a recent conversation with IUCN on this. So these are some of the examples I would like to mention here. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Deepshika. Margarita, would you like to go and respond to this email? Sorry, to this question?
I don't really work in landscapes so far,
yeah.
but we do work in several seascapes that requires cooperation among the different countries, which at the moment in my region with the South China Sea is a little difficult. It requires negotiations and tackling sensitive areas. So it also refers to this question by Pradyuma Rana, wherein how do you prioritize regional level cooperation, wherein there is this kind of sensitive jurisdiction issues. So I think one of the challenges that we have at COBSI in how do you do seascapes conservation, how do you make sure that they all cooperate when there are also political challenges. And I think the way to address this is to see working in different silos. People currently work in different silos. So pollution people are there, climate people are here, and conservation people are here. When we were developing the MCE framework, the Marine and Coastal Ecosystems Framework, for example, it was requested that the climate aspect is to be transferred to a different unit since we are focusing on marine and coastal space. So, there is still a need to be able to inform the key integration of this one. And it was through this kind of constant negotiations that we try to do in our work.
Okay, thank you, Margarita, and thank you to all the panelists. And we have Pradyumna Rana who asked about the prioritization. So we will park this question for a while. We'll come back to it on the third question. So I'll go to the second question, and my second question is to Ambassador Adio. Ambassador Adio, like we heard a lot in this morning about how vulnerable the ecosystem is, and then and we heard about different initiatives, adaptation initiatives that's happened in the region. And of course, even if it's the adaptation initiatives are on a very small scale, and there are even if with the best of the initiatives, there are some ecosystem and ecosystem services that go through irreversible damage. So when we have this irreversible damage, there are economic and non-economic damage on the ecosystem and ecosystem services. So coming from UNFCCC as a member of a transition committee for loss and damage, and also you have experience of working on adaptation also, based on your vast experience both on adaptation and loss and damage, what do you think are the connection between adaptation and loss and damage in this region, and what are the main challenges that needs to be addressed? Over to you,
Thank you.
Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think those questions are critically important. I think adaptation and loss and damage, there are some linkages. But we also need to differentiate both two, adaptation and also mitigation. As you can see, adaptation is something that we could adapt. We have enough capacity to adapt. But if something that is going beyond our adaptive capacity, and then this is of loss and damage. But some views out there, they are trying to mix adaptation and loss and damage when they discuss about minimizing and addressing loss and damage. But in fact, if we are going to have sea level rise in a small and developing states, and then adaptation issue will be construction of seawall or planting mangroves as adaptation measures. But then if mitigation is still problematic for all colleagues around the world, and emission will be going up, and then temperature will be increased. As a result, melting of ice in the pools will be increased. And then sea level rise will be increasingly happening, going beyond our capacity to adapt. Even though we construct seawall, even we conserve and planting the mangrove in coastal areas, but this will be not going to solve our problem. This is issue of loss and damage, permanent loss and damage. So we need to address this permanent loss and damage, not to minimize. Minimizing of loss and damage will be part of adaptation, but addressing loss and damage, real loss and damage, will be out of adaptation. So this is adaptation issues. And of course, there is some linkage there. If we mitigate greenhouse gas at global level, we do enough for mitigation, we will limit temperature, not going beyond 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius as agreed in Paris. And then loss and damage will be minimized through adaptation and also through, let's say, mitigation measures. If we are not achieving 1.5 degrees Celsius, then minimizing of loss and damage will be not possible. So we need to address this loss and damage. So I think all regions in this Asia Pacific site, we have different issues of vulnerabilities. We have sea level rise issues. We have ocean acidification issues. We have flash flood issues, drought, both from stream events and also slow onset events. Those will be causing issue of losses and damage, both from economic and also non-economic loss and damage. So I think from island perspective, I think ocean acidification that will be killing our marine biodiversity. It is not be possible for us to adapt. It is something that we need to link this to averting issues by mitigation actions. So I think in terms of floods, issues, this is also very, very important, and it's happening everywhere. Even in China at the moment, it's happening. So how to answer this? How to respond this? I think that's a challenge. It's not possible for us to respond as one country, because climate change is global issues. We need to negotiate with our partners out there, at least for those countries who have very high rate of emission of greenhouse gases. They need to provide support. So the challenge is lack of human capacity to adapt and to address and to respond to loss and damage, and technological capacity to address or to adapt loss and damage and also adaptation. And in terms of finance, I think this is core issue that we need to solve. So most of our region, I think we have a limited financial capacity to address loss and damage issues. Even this issue is very, new for us, and we only provide some emergency response issues when disasters are happening. This is part of extreme weather event. But what about slow onset event? We need to have recovery issues, rehabilitation issues, and restoration issues toward our ecosystem. That is not our part. It's almost not possible for us to provide financial support for this by our national budget. And even for international budget, it's still very limited, because some colleagues around the world, they consider this is as adaptation. But in fact, this is not adaptation. Humanitarian assistance are there, But once they provide assistance after 2-3 weeks, over. There is no continuity issues for recovery, rehabilitation, and restoration of, let's say, ecosystem loss and damage. So in this regard, we, as a way forward, to have an international financial mechanism in place, permanent financial mechanism accountable to the Conference of Parties under the UNFCCC and also the Paris Agreement, to assure our issues, to really answer and also respond to the loss and damage that we are facing in our region, in the Pacific region. I think this is critically important. So this is some sort of way forward. How could countries in the world cooperate jointly to address these loss and damage issues? That's why we have decision on the funding arrangement and also fund for addressing, also responding loss and damage in developing countries. So in terms of I think solution, I think we kindly request developed country parties under the Paris Agreement to provide public finance, grant-based finance into the loss and damage fund established at COP27 in Egypt last year. And then it will be quickly operationalized at COP28 in Dubai by the end of this year. And then after that, we still look forward to get a quick disbursement of this fund in, into the system that will be accessible for all vulnerable developing countries. I think this is critically important. And of course, as one of the Transitional Committee members, I think I still need to push this. So it's not possible for us to provide our own budget, but it is part of, let's say, climate justice fund. Who emits a lot, they need to take responsibility of this. And solidarity fund will be also there. So solidarity issues among colleagues around the world will be critically important to solve this issue. So I think this is my my points, and then I will be able to provide more answer about your third question, but I need to stop here, and then I am ready to answer some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Adios. And you have raised a very good question about the linkage between adaptation and loss and damage and what needs to be done in loss and damage, right? You talked a lot about the Climate Justice Fund and the international financial mechanism. So I think this will lead to my third and final question about and I think Pradyumna Rana also asked the same question, that what should we prioritize as a region as going forward to ensure that we build a very resilient and resilient ecosystem. So maybe coming from from your experience, maybe I can hand over to Ambassador Adios first for maybe a quick 1 minute on your take on, you did talk a lot about international level prioritization. But as a government, what do you think the government should prioritize on? Maybe we can.
Thank you very much. I missed some of your points, but in fact, this is critically important to solve. How to address some sort of loss and damage fund and funding arrangements around the world, and how to establish this under the convention so that it will be easily accessed by affected countries once they face disasters. I think that's the key issues. And then we do not want to have a very long and complex, let's say, bureaucracy issues like one that we are having with Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, Global Environmental Facility, and so on and so forth. We need to have a rapid disbursement issues. So once we got disasters, by tomorrow, we need to communicate with our financial mechanism under the convention, and the day after tomorrow we could get it, or even tomorrow we can get it. It will be very late. So I think that that's something that we need to think about. But I missed your questions because of internet connectivity issues.
Yeah, I think you responded to that, Dr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. So what we will do, we need to have to establish our national system in place, at least to communicate our problem with regard to loss and damage that we faced, both from slow onset event and also rapid stream events. If we have a rapid stream event, I think we need to answer or to respond this quickly, and we need to communicate to the financial mechanism established under the convention. But if we have a, let's say, slow onset event, we need to have loss and damage and adaptation plans at national level. For adaptation, we have a national adaptation plan, and all adaptation priorities should be under the documents of national adaptation plan. And then let's say investment plan will be also part of these documents. So it will be ready to be funded by adaptation fund under the Paris Agreement. It's for adaptation. Also, let's say adaptation priorities will be also funded by, let's say, Green Climate Fund, because Green Climate Fund is 50% for adaptation and 50% for mitigation. But for loss and damage fund, we need to get loss and damage real fund from the convention that I just mentioned a while ago. So I think that will be quite a good solution for us. So let us discuss about how to assess our national needs on adaptation, national needs on loss and damage, both from slow onset events and also rapid stream events. We missed that. So once we have priorities in place, this is for, let's say, for slow onset events, we need to communicate this. And also for the urgent needs of rapid events, we also need to communicate this issue to our partners around the world. That is something that our colleagues from developed countries say it would be mosaic issues. And then also the fund, it should be under the convention. So mosaic issue will be somewhere else. But for fund, for loss and damage, I think it should be managed by residence board. So residence board is not like adaptation fund board or green climate fund board. It should be country-based. They can sit everywhere, but once country A affected by the impact of climate change extreme events, they need to discuss these issues at board level by having virtual meetings, and then they need to disperse after the disaster. I think that's very important.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. There's a very interesting discussion indeed. So maybe I'll post the same question to our panelists, and this time maybe we can go from mountain to forest to the coastal. Maybe Deepsika, if you'd like to come and give your 1 minute thought on what should be our priority going way forward.
Yeah, thanks again, Moon, for that, and especially hearing to His Excellency. I think it was really good to know about the loss and damage perspective. This is also something which we are trying to strengthen in the HKH region, in the Himalayan region and the Hindu-Kush region. So from our end, we really think that it is very important to address the adaptation needs in the HKH, especially in the context of the warming beyond 1.5 degree, and to plan and anticipatory responses to potentially irreversible challenges, actually. Then secondly, definitely on strengthening the policies. They need to ensure the protection of mountain societies which are threatened by these changes. Strengthening the regional and global cooperation and collaboration as well is urgently needed, as I've already mentioned about the understanding the transboundary implications of these changes. Some of the, there's a need to develop the stronger science on the ecosystems and also, interconnectedness. Another thing which I would like to see is that how, having focus on, especially on the water ecosystem in terms of the mountains are called water tower of Asia. So, how we can have those collaborations and measuring the impacts of the linkages of the upstream and downstream. Effective adaptation is the key to maintaining the sustainable mountain development, to increase the capacity of mountain societies to adapt with enhanced speed, scope, and depth as well. And also linking into the transformational strategies which are needed rather than incremental adaptation. Another important aspect is sectoral policies are no more static. So they should be considered dynamic and need updating on a regular basis. Integrated approach of planning, for example, is also very much important in different thematic sectors. And they'll also help the administration and the governments to achieve the international pledges. Another important aspect is like the whole EBA approach and nature positive solutions and adaptation, which will have long-term and positive impacts on the sustainability. I think that is very, very important across the region. And also looking at the investments, blended mechanisms of finance, how we can strengthen the public-private partnerships, how we can actually tap into the existing financing mechanisms, whether it is with GCF, whether it is with AF and others. So yeah, these are just quick points. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Deepsika. Over to you, Satrio. I know we are running late, but sorry to our participant, but yeah, I think we'll overrun by 5 minutes. Over to you, Satrio.
Sure. Yeah, I just picked one topic in terms of like priority. So I think it has been mentioned several times by different panelists that the issue of silo and lack of coordination between actors is really important to tackle. And I think to overcome that, we need partnerships. But what kind of partnerships? So we need partnerships that are inclusive, that are demand-driven. And in that sense, I think we need to we shouldn't exclude any important stakeholder group. So we need to ensure that indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth are meaningfully involved in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of adaptation measures. So in the context of forest ecosystems, for example, FLR, and implementation of climate smart agroforestry. And at IUCN, we've also tried to develop tools and guidelines that really take all these into account. For example, is the participatory Rome restoration opportunities assessment methodology. So these kind of collaborative partnership that needs to be enhanced in our region will also need to be based on the best available science and also traditional knowledge. So in the context of forest ecosystems, I've talked about the importance of tipping point, and the science around it is quite complex, but it needs to be clearly communicated to stakeholders. And the results of ecosystems, forest ecosystems modeling and climate model also need to be clearly informed so that stakeholders can adopt the right adaptation interventions. And at the same time, of course, local communities, the IPLCs, they possess valuable traditional knowledge that can be used to refine adaptation measures further. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Satrio. And over to you, Margarita, for your final.
Thank you so much. So I look at this at the regional level as COBSI. So I think I reiterate once again what I mentioned earlier, the need to focus also on ensuring active and effective collaboration, as mentioned by several panelists, among the different sectors, including at transboundary level. We should look at both vertical and horizontal. By vertical, I mean the different layers of society, and horizontal across the different sectors. So for COBSI, we are an intergovernmental regional seas mechanism among 9 countries in the East Asian seas. And while our work has mostly been focused on marine pollution and in coastal and marine conservation, we are slowly trying to integrate this work on climate adaptation and resilience for the next few years. Because we know that this is particularly crucial for the region in the East and Southeast Asia, home to large coastal megacities with hundreds of millions of people vulnerable to climate change. So we should really stop working in silos and integrate all these together. And as a regional body, we want to support participating countries in attaining their targets, not only the GBF, which we're currently focused on, but as well as their Paris Agreement and all these things. We try to find ways to increase capacity, encourage dialogue, learning exchanges, which we can do as a collaborative body at the regional seas, and provide science policy interface among these. So it's really, really essential to synergize among the different countries for them to realize the benefits of working together in this scale. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margareta. Thank you all to all four panelists for a very interesting discussion. So now we are coming towards the end of our webinar. So I'll hand over to Mireille for wrapping up the panel discussion and for the closing remark. Mireille Atala is the head of Nature for Climate Branch at UNEP and oversees the UN Decade for Environment Ecosystem Restoration. She has been with UN system for more than 15 years at UN RED on national program and at UNDP as Jeff Regional Technical Advisor supporting countries in Arab states, West and Central Africa in assessing sustainable land management, biodiversity, and international water funding. So prior to joining UN, she has worked for government of DRC in running its national RED program and also has worked with Lifebird International NGO and the Ministry of Environment. Over to you, Mireille.
Thank you very much, Moon. And it's going to be for me a very difficult task to close this meeting because I will not actually attempt to summarize. I will just express some key takeaways. First of all, a huge thanks to our panelists, to our moderator, to our co-host, IUCN, and in particular also to our audience. I see that we have quite a broad and wide audience attending this webinar. Some key takeaways, in particular, as we look forward towards reconvening in Songdo at the end of the month. First and foremost for me is that different ecosystems will require different approaches. And in Asia, in the Asia region, Asia-Pacific region in particular, we have a huge diversity of such ecosystems. So there will be a challenge in that, not only because we have such a diversity of ecosystems, but also because we have a diversity in terms of governance systems, in terms of LDCs and SIDS, in terms of countries in conflicts, middle-income countries. So all of these actually from the discussion that we've had have an implication on governance, and governance is one of the critical factors that define the success or failure of adaptation approaches. As we speak, there's the Global Goal on Adaptation workshop is convening in Argentina right now. And one of my takeaways from monitoring that process or following that process closely is that adaptation is about development. We've just heard from COP-C the intent to integrate, in addition to updating targets on the GBF, to integrate targets on the Paris Agreement as well. When we're talking about climate change, in particular about adaptation, we're talking about development across so many sectors. And one of the things that I'm observing right now is that, or that we've been observing for a while, is that plans, strategies, policies are reaching their expiry date and, are reaching the point where they need to be updated from a time, in terms of their timelines, without implementation having progressed much. So here I would really like to echo the ambassador's plea to make sure that funding is available at scale for adaptation within a 50-50 share of overall climate finance, to make sure that these plans are not only designed and conceived in a collaborative and multi-sectoral approach, but more importantly, that they are implemented, because in implementation, through implementation comes actual adaptation and resilience. And maybe what we need to be thinking about is how to measure this implementation so that we keep ourselves accountable towards those ambitions. From the conversation as well, I take it that there are so many ecosystems that can deliver on both mitigation, adaptation, and also slow onset events. And in the case of loss and damage, here I would really like to recall non-economic losses and damages, and in particular from the lens of climate justice, recognize the need for future generations to be exposed and to have the opportunity to know species, ecosystems, wetlands, glaciers, the way that we know them. And so keeping that in mind, what is the forward-looking management and what are the forward-looking implementation and restoration measures that we need to start implementing today that will also take into account what climate will be in the future. As we already know, we are way off track the 1.5 degrees of the Paris Agreement. So with these words, I would just like to thank everyone again, really insist on the fact that the recognition of loss and damage during the COP is an opportunity for all of us as a community to advocate even more for mitigation and for adaptation so that we minimize losses and damages, because for us, it's not about how will we implement loss and damage, it's really about how will we make sure that we minimize losses and damages as much as possible in all their nature. And so with this, I would like to thank everyone for your participation, for your provocative thoughts, and very much look forward to continuing this conversation and to dig deeper on these issues in Songdo, with a huge thanks to the government of Korea for hosting the 8th APAN Forum, and looking forward to meeting everyone there. Thank you very much. And a huge thanks to the APAN Secretariat for supporting with this organization and for IUCN for co-hosting it with us. Over to you, Moon.
Thank you, Mira. Thank you very much for wrapping up and the very inspiring closing remark. So with this, I'd like to thank all our panelists and a participant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.